I'm not talking about odd meters, I'm not talking about key changes, I'm not even talking about using bongos. I'm talking about polyphonic vocal arrangements. Look, I know it sounds like a stuffy academic concept, but you should know that you have already proven to yourself that it doesn't actually have to be that hard. Remember when you were like 5 years old, and your teacher made the class sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat? Well, after that, they probably split the class into groups and made each group start singing the song at different times. This creates polyphony. And if 5-year-old you can do it, well, then so can you. So in this video, you won't get overwhelmed with rules. I've broken it down into my own 4 categories, all of which can be found in rock and pop music, and I'll give you some really loose tips on how to get started with each of these along the way. By the end, you'll realize that this technique can not only be fun to explore, but it can also have a really strong connection to the meaning of the song. The first and easiest category of polyphony uses the exact same principle as Row, Row, Row Your Boat. So let's check out Dear Boy by Paul and Linda McCartney. So I'll get to that in just a sec, but you should know for copyright reasons, all the examples are my own recreations, and sometimes I've simplified the arrangement for clarity. Also, I've used a vocal synthesizer to make the vocals. They clearly don't sound like the original singers, and despite my best effort, they pronounce things weirdly sometimes and often accent the wrong syllables. They get the point across, but yeah, here's not Paul McCartney.
I hope you never know, dear boy, how much you miss, dear boy. And even if you fall in love, dear boy, it won't be half as good as this. I hope you never know how much.
So this is category 1, and I call it displacement. So as the name implies, all you have to really do is copy-paste the same melody and shift it over a bit, and that creates polyphony. This is by far the easiest way to create polyphony since you don't have to write anything new. But there are still some things that you should keep in mind in order to make it work. Number 1, polyphony by displacement is easiest to pull off with tonal chord progressions and tonal melodies. The more chromatic your material is, the more you'll have to modify the displaced melody because it won't line up with the harmony anymore. 2, the displaced melody doesn't need to be an exact copy. You can make slight alterations to avoid any clashes with the original melody or to improve the phrasing, such as in this example. Number 3, displace the melody in a way that the natural accents still fall in a place that make it easy to sing. In rock and pop, most lyrics are set following the natural accents of speech, and in most cases, shifting this over by full beats will retain these accents. Starting on the 2nd or 4th 16th note in this case would make it very awkward to sing and listen to.
I hope you never know, dear boy, how much you miss, dear boy.
Here are some other songs that use this type of polyphony. So in this category, polyphony was created by reusing material from the song. But there are other ways of reusing material from the same song that can also produce a different type of polyphony. But first, I should probably clarify what exactly I mean by polyphony in the context of this video. In a broad sense, polyphony is when there are multiple independent melodies occurring simultaneously that are of relatively equal importance. Of course, this can occur with instruments as well as voices, but for the purposes of this video, I'm focusing on only voice. But I'd like to reduce the scope even further, so here's what I don't mean by polyphony. Call and response, because the melodies don't overlap, and wordless vocals, because in polyphonic contexts, wordless vocals don't compete for foreground space the way worded vocals do, so the effect of polyphony is less pronounced. In short, I want to focus on words versus words, not words versus syllables, or syllables versus syllables. So now that you know what I'm talking about,
Hit me, baby, one more time.
so you're probably aware of the arranging advice that tells us that whenever we repeat a section, we should probably add something new to keep it interesting. But Brittany is here to tell you that you don't have to add something new, you just have to add something. Here are the last 2 choruses of Baby One More Time by Britney Spears. Pay attention to the second one.
My loneliness is killing me. I must confess, I still believe. Hit me, baby, one more time. That my loneliness is killing me now. I must confess.
So on first listen, this new melody might seem like it is an ad-lib reinterpretation of the chorus melody, and yes, it is strongly related to the chorus, but we've actually heard this before in the bridge. So this is category 2, recycled layering, and this is when you reuse parts from different sections of the song that we've heard before and superimpose them. So to try this for yourself, you can follow similar guidelines to category number 1 and just try layering different parts of your song on top of each other and see what happens. In my experience, this seems to be the type of polyphony that's most common in pop music, and you'll even find some songs that layer 3 or 4 different melodies from different sections, such as Beck's Nicotine and Gravy. So both categories of polyphony we've seen so far involve reusing existing material from within the song, but that doesn't have to be the case. Take a listen to this example and see if you can figure out how this arrangement is working. Just for context, this is the first chorus and we haven't heard any of these melodies before.
I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me the excitations. I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me the excitations.
Good vibrations.
Even though we haven't heard any of these parts before, it's not as confusing as you would think it would be because each part is introduced one at a time. If the chorus was all 4 of these at once the whole time, it would be a lot harder to follow. So this is what I call category 3, new and staggering, which basically just means each part is new, but the entrances are staggered. In other words, they're introduced one at a time. As staggering as this example might sound, you're probably already familiar with this type of polyphony, just on a different time scale. It's quite common to add new layers of vocals to each repetition of the chorus, which can sometimes result in a polyphonic texture, and this works on the same principle as good vibrations, except on a section-to-section time scale rather than all within one section. So categories 3 and 4 of polyphony are quite similar, so I'll save the tips for after category 4. Here are some more examples of category 3 polyphony. And it's worth noting that most of the examples from now on in this video are going to be from the prog rock genre, because these rarely happen in rock, and even less so in pop. Before reaching the final category, no video about polyphony would be complete without mentioning the famous parallel fifths rule. Though it is largely irrelevant in modern music, you should at least know why it used to be important, because it pertains to polyphony. So here's a completely fictitious story to prove why you should care about parallel fifths. Back when rich dudes wore silly white wigs, they didn't have sports cars to impress people with, so they often resorted to showing off their large choral groups. But the sizes of these choral groups quickly got out of hand, so strict limits were imposed upon their size. Weirdly, every choral group sang only in unison, and so they could only really stand out by being louder than the other groups, which of course has its limits. It wasn't until Wolfgang von Wolfgang came along and added a second harmony part that things almost got interesting again. But his crucial mistake was that he wrote exclusively in parallel fifths, which blended so well that it kinda sounded like unison if you weren't paying attention. And let's be real, most people didn't pay attention, so he died unrecognized. But his son, Wolfgang von Wolfgang, picked up on his father's mistake and began using contrary motion, adding even more voices and avoiding parallel fifths, unisons, and octaves at all costs. Naturally, people went crazy for him in his music because he figured out how to maintain voice independence in a polyphonic context and made people think his choral group was way bigger than it actually was. So using polyphony as a cool arrangement technique is all fine and dandy, but like with any technique, I find the best uses are when the technique and the subject matter relate on a deeper level. So you'll see what I mean with this next song by Spocksbeard. For context, this song seems to be about the dread of revealing one's true feelings to a romantic partner and the negative thought loops that occur as a result of the anticipation. And so after this intro, there is a short instrumental section followed by this a cappella example with all new material we're hearing for the first time.
You wouldn't speak to me, I would be left behind. Read through if you knew all the things in my mind. I'd probably feel worse, you'd probably scream and shout, spread just or even worse, quietly shut me out.
Unlike the Beach Boys example, there are no staggered entrances, and this is what I consider category 4. New and confusing. It's just a silly name, so it's easy to remember, but basically what I just mean is that it's all new material and it's all presented simultaneously, which can result in a confusing texture. But that doesn't mean it's bad arranging, because it seems to me that polyphonic vocals would be the perfect arranging technique to represent overlapping thought loops, and so a little confusion is warranted since it suits the subject matter of the song. That being said, there's a fine line between elegant confusion and straight up chaos, so let's see how Spocksbeard Foxbeard made it work in this example. 1. The words are the same or very similar in each voice. Once our brain picks up on the fact that the words are basically the same in all voices, we have more bandwidth to focus on the overall vocal arrangement. But if you absolutely want different words in each part, I would recommend using staggered entrances like in category 3. Number 2, the melodies add up to harmonies. Even though each voice is its own linear melody, the sum of all parts still create vertical chords that reflect the overarching chord progression or create passing chords that make sense within the context. Number 3, voices do not cross registers. Except for the occasional unison, each voice maintains its vertical position relative to the others, making it easier to distinguish the individual melodies. This would be even more important if it was the same singer singing all of the parts, but it's still a good practice to maintain regardless. Number 4, avoid parallel fifths, octaves, and unisons. Using parallel fifths, octaves, or unisons can create the illusion that two different voices are merging into one, and that's not what you want. But you can break this rule for effect. Like in this case, all the voices land on a unison and break out again to make the arrangement go from small to big for the very end. This is the equivalent of making your mix go mono and expand back out to full stereo to make your build-up more impactful. And finally, number 5, use mixing to your advantage. In this case, each voice is panned separately except for the top and bottom voices, but this is fine because the register between these two creates a natural separation between the voices. And there are other approaches to mixing that will make your polyphony work better too, like mixing each vocal a little less up front than you would a lead vocal so that each one has a little bit more space. Or in the case of staggered entrances, you could turn up a voice when it comes in and then turn it back down when others start to come in after it. Like I said, most of the examples you'll find in category 4 are in prog rock, but if you like that, you can check out these songs. So there's one thing that I didn't talk about much in this video that's going to be very important to your polyphonic writing, and that's your use of passing tones. So you can check out this video to see how Paul McCartney used passing tones to create super memorable bass lines, and you can easily extrapolate on that info to help improve your polyphonic writing.